Just wait one more minute for people to join. Okay, should we make a start? So welcome all to the IIIF Commons and IIIF Prezi presentation. These are two kind of community projects that people have been volunteering to work on. The first one, IIIF Prezi, is a Python library for working with IIIF version 3. And the IIIF Commons is a kind of a wider collective looking at creating JavaScript components. So we're going to split the session in half. The first, we're going to hear from Mike and Halal about IIIF Prezi, and then we'll go on to the IIIF Commons presentation. If you've got any questions during the presentations, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll cover them at the end of each half. So if I can pass over to Mike to start presenting.
Everybody, let's just share the presentation here. So I hope that you can all see the presentation window there. Is that coming through okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So hi, my name is Mike Bennett. I am one of the maintainers of the IIIF Prezi 3 library. So I'm here just to give you a very quick introduction to what it's about. So some of you may have used the IIIF Prezi existing Python library. So basically IIIF Prezi 3 is a Python library for the creation and manipulation of IIIF Presentation API 3 objects. It's a from scratch rewrite of the existing library. So we did discuss a little bit, should we merge the two into one library? Should we have a completely separate library? Because of the idea that we want to encourage people to adopt Presentation 3, it's a separate library. It was community developed over the last year and a half or so. We have a small team of maintainers. And we started in June last year. So the big announcement and the thing we're very happy for at this conference is we've just released the kind of stable production 1.0 release of the library. So in common with a lot of the IIIF projects and the way that these things work, we had a lot of open Zoom calls on a regular basis, which were arranged through the technical channel in the IIIF Slack. And from this, we had a small group of people who were sort of regularly attending the meetings, who became the maintenance team. So when we started last year, we spent a lot of time looking at different approaches for the library, how we might build in useful functionality that could keep track with increasing changes in the presentation API and be easily extendable. So we had a lot of experimentation with different libraries and approaches, and we built the kind of framework for the library, and we had a public hackathon earlier this year in May, which quite a few people came to. Some of you may be here to really flesh out the library. So the core of how IIIF Prezi works is that we're using a tool called Pydantic, which is a Python library for data modeling and validation. So this allows us to have validation during the creation and construction of objects. So this is very useful when you're dealing with something which has a fixed schema, as Presentation API does. And it allows us to leverage the fact that there's an existing JSON schema used for the validator, and to make sure that we always produce valid Presentation 3 JSON linked data when serializing. It also allows us a useful thing of built-in handling of existing manifests. So with the library, you can actually open an existing manifest, and Pydantic will convert it to all of the Python objects automatically from the JSON. So we didn't have to write any sort of loading or deserialization code. So we use a second tool called Data Model Code Gen, which turns the Presentation 3 JSON schema from the validator into these Pydantic objects in Python. So this is the kind of real core of the library. It models the entire Presentation 3 API and all properties directly from the JSON schema. And then in order to make the library kind of useful for workflows and a bit more functional, we've extended this with a variety of helper methods. So this is the way that we imagine most people will interact with the library and how it works. So the main type of helper method that we have is called makex or addx, depending on exactly the functionality. And the idea from this is this helps you build up the nesting really easily. So if you create a manifest object, rather than having to create a separate canvas object and then, make sure it's in the items structure, we have a helper which goes on the manifest class, and it's called add canvas. So you make your manifest, you call manifest.addCanvas, and bingo, a canvas is created for you in the right place with all of the structure. Likewise, a canvas object has, for example, an add image helper method. And this you can pass in the basic structure, the basic information of the image, and it will create the necessary intermediate structures like the annotation page and the annotation itself, so that you don't have to build every single part of the structure, but rather for a common use case, we have helpers that can do the kind of necessary intermediate bits. So these are the most prevalent type of helper. We have them on almost everything. So, manifests will have add canvas, they have add range, collections have add manifest, we have sort of add annotation, etc., add service. So we try to model the entirety of the kind of common use cases of Presentation API with these helper methods. We have other helpers that are designed for setting properties or interfacing with external services. So two examples here is that canvas objects and the bodies of annotation have a helper called setHWD for passing in the height, width, duration. So if you have a height, width, duration somewhere, you can sort of pass it into this helper a couple of times and set all of these properties. And for example, I talked before about adding a canvas with the helper, which requires you to have all the canvas information. If you have a IIIF image API service, then we have a create canvas from IIIF helper. So here you plug in the URL of the image service, and it will retrieve the info.json, it will create the canvas for you, it will build the whole structure. And the last type of helper we have is kind of some black magic helpers to do with useful things to dealing with the structure of Presentation 3. So for example, all labels have to be a language map. So we have a helper that allows you to set a config that can set a default language, and then you can pass a label as a string when creating an object. So rather than having to do manifest brackets, label equals dictionary, en, array, string values, every time you construct it, you can just pass in label equals and a string value, and the helper will create all that structure for you. Likewise, for things such as ID fields, we have some auto ID helpers that can programmatically generate the ID. So you can configure sort of base URLs, you can configure whether you just want incrementing integers or UUIDs, or indeed unique addresses unique base addresses per type. So I don't know how well this comes through on the screen share. It's maybe a little bit small, but this is a short example of the simplest usage of the library. So here you can see that I'm importing the manifest object from the library. I'm creating a manifest just with label as a string, and I'm calling the make canvas from IIIF with the photograph from Göttingen reference from the sort of image API examples. And then when I print that, you see that we have the context block included. The ID has been auto-generated for me based on the default setting of the library to make sure that it's valid. The type is applied. We have a label structure with the language of none because I didn't set a default language. You can see that this creates the valid language map. And we have the item structure with the canvas, the annotation page, the annotation, all the way down to the image service. So there is a valid presentation 3 manifest created with 3 lines of code. So we hope that this is kind of a useful thing with these helpers, so that, you know, before you might have had to build in a loop, creating all these things, creating all the JSON yourself. So we have some other demos. I have been working along with some of the other maintainers on creating examples from all of the IIIF cookbook recipes, recreating them with this library. So you see here, this is the demo for the very first cookbook, which is the minimum viable manifest for an image. And you can see that now in this time, I'm importing the autolang config and I'm setting it to EN, so that when we create the label objects, they will by default be given EN as the language value. So likewise, now we have a manifest. We're creating this with an explicit ID and a label. Then we are creating a canvas on that object. And then we are adding an image to that canvas and then printing it out. So when you look at this, then again, you get a nice valid JSON manifest, complete with all of the details. And you can see here the label EN image 1 from the config. So when you're looking at using the library, we have a variety of these documented now, so you can sort of learn by example. And I am going to pass over, if he's here, to Hillel to talk very quickly about a usage.
Yeah, hi, I'm here. Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm this is an assistant director for digital strategies at the Rockefeller Archive Center, and IIIF community loves the use case. So wanted to kind of give an example of how this might be used. So a couple of years ago, we implemented IIIF as part of an update to our discovery environment. And so the diagram below shows you a Django Python application that we built to produce the various image derivatives that we needed, as well as the presentation manifest. So this probably looks familiar to you. If it does, that's because I looked at what other people were doing and copied it. So this is all great. Mike, can you go to the next slide, please? Except that we wanted to start off using version 3 of the IIIF Presentation API. And what we found at that time was that there weren't any libraries out there that would be able to create native version 3 manifests. Mike mentioned the previous version of IIIF Prezi library, which creates version 2 manifests, and then we used a separate library, Prezi 2.3, to convert those version 2 manifests to version 3 manifests. So this worked, right? Like, it worked. It's fine. We've been using it in production for a while now, but there is something that's kind of like counterintuitive about creating version 2 manifests that you're never actually going to use. So that's what we found out about this IIIF Prezi pre-initiative. We were like, yes, this is the thing that we need to contribute to. So we haven't, full disclosure, we haven't yet actually rolled this library into our code, but when we do, I think we anticipate a couple of very obvious benefits, like Mike was just showing you, kind of the reduction of complexity and number of lines of code, very obvious. And just reduce the number of dependencies, but I think there's also kind of less quantifiable benefits of working with the community. And I think that the learning, I would say on a personal level, the learning that we were able to do with this group and kind of like thinking about how to build this tool was really rewarding. So it's a little less quantified, a little fuzzier, but no less important. So Mike, back to you.
Thanks, Hillel. So that was a very, very quick overview. Obviously, we have a sort of shortish session here, but you can get the library now. You can get it straight from PyPy. You can look at the GitHub. So on the GitHub, we have like a README with some more instructions. There will be very shortly after this talk the cookbook issues as examples that I showed. And we are currently, most of us, hanging out in the #technical channel on the IIIF Slack, so you can find us there. Please feel free to fire in questions, and please contribute everything you wish to. Issues for the library, if you find bugs, use cases, if there's something you want to do the library doesn't cover yet, and even code. So we will continue as a group of maintainers meeting semi-regularly throughout the next year. So keep your eye out for notifications in the technical channel about this thing here. And yes, I see there's a few questions popping up in chat, so I will answer those in the chat now. And if you have any more questions, please fire them in. I'll be hanging around the chat during the second part of this session. So that was it. A very, very brief introduction to the IIIF Prezi library. Thanks very much, and we'll catch up with you at some point soon.
Thanks, Mike. We've got a couple of minutes if you wanted to answer Julian and Joe's questions.
Okay. Right, let's have a scroll down here. Is there a complete list of the add extensions? So yes, we have a small issue in the GitHub with the automatic documentation building, which lists these at the moment, but hopefully we'll resolve that in the next couple of days. Otherwise, yeah, I will make a manual list if we don't get the automatic docs building going properly. Other questions? Julian, very nice indeed. Can also descriptive metadata be generated with the library? Yes, so obviously you can set every property from the presentation 3 specification, which includes metadata. So there is an example in the cookbook which demonstrates that. In fact, if I just pull up here, I might be able to show you very, very quickly an example of the generating metadata. Cookbook, and in the meantime, let's have a look what else we got here. Labels, yes, yeah. I mean, part of the idea here, Brian, was very much to kind of reduce the instances of accidentally incorrect presentation 3 manifests in the world, and we hope that it's useful for pipelines. Like I said, because it's based on Pydantic, it does validate everything on creation. So as far as we know, it should be almost impossible to generate an invalid presentation 3 manifest. There's maybe a couple of small edge cases, but we maybe try not to think too hard about that.
Just while you're setting that up, it's been really interesting doing it with Pydantic, which is this automatic conversion from the JSON schema to the Python code. And it's meant that we've picked up lots of kind of issues with the schema itself, and so we're constantly making changes to the schema when we're kind of finding it through IIIF Prezi 3. So it's been a really good kind of co-collaboration process.
Yeah, here we go. So share screen quickly, and we want to go for this desktop here. So if I just kind of move this in so you can actually see, let's just go one at a time. So what we have here is the creation with the managed, this is recipe number 6 for text language internationalization and multi-language values. So here you can see that I'm creating a manifest. So I can just zoom in a little bit here. Creating a manifest with a label in multiple languages. And again, the metadata here using this key value string construction to pass in labels in multi-values here, which have a single identical value, because of course the name of the author is rendered the same in both languages here, but also here where you have subject and sujet and a value that appears differently in English and in French. So all this creation is possible. Likewise here, actually, we have in the required statement in multiple languages and the summary in multiple languages. So if I just pull this little bit of code here quickly, copy, and if we just pull up now a terminal, if I just paste that example code in and print the manifest, you will see that it's created the label with multiple values. It's created the metadata here, again, multiple values, and the subjects, summaries, required statements, etc. And of course, the regular things you'd expect from the Canvas item there. So I hope that kind of demonstrates quickly that part. 7 minutes.
Thanks, Mike. I think we'll have to move on to the next presentation, but
I shall answer any more questions in the chat. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah. That's brilliant, thank you. And a huge thanks to Mike and Hilal and all the people who have been volunteering to develop the Prezi application. It's been great. And also the separate group of volunteers who were involved in the hackathon. It's been a really great project to work on. Thank you all. So next we're going to move on to IIIF Commons, which is a much newer kind of initiative. But again, it's focusing on kind of how we can make the developer experience and also how to make it easier to work and develop and create new different tools. So I'll pass over to Matt, who's going to do an intro to IIIF Commons. And again, questions in the chat, and once the three presenters have presented, we'll come back to them. So thanks, Matt.
Hi. Thanks, Glenn. I'm Matt Jordan. I'm a developer at Northwestern University Libraries. And I'm just going to be introducing IIIF Commons, what it is, and then passing over to Stephen Fraser and Ed to discuss some of the tooling and packages that are inside of Commons. What is Commons? Well, collaboration in the IIIF community is somewhat, built into its foundation. And over time, as different viewers or even other tooling beyond viewers have evolved to provide solutions around the IIIF and its various APIs. Sometimes those tools start to overlap each other, and as far as solving problems and the efforts put towards those. And so Commons is really just a group of people that aim to solve these problems together, and sort of create tooling and put these solutions into common repositories that are available to everyone. Let's go here. So we meet monthly as of right now, and Commons is entirely open to anyone to join in. I only just started joining calls about a year ago around this time, and it's been extremely beneficial as sort of I'm Northwestern, and everyone on our team is trying to solve problems. We didn't necessarily want to do those things on our own, so we have sought out resources in the IIIF Commons and across. But it's more than just the tooling, it's also that we are able to talk about these issues together. And I think that's sort of key to this, especially in a community like IIIF. One complex question that came about was in 2020, and was, how viewers such as Mirador 3 and Universal Viewer could solve these problems together, solve a complex problem together. It was just around like canvases of varying heights when viewed two up, and how annotations were sort of becoming unaligned. And I don't think that problem has yet even been solved yet. But these type of scenarios have shown that viewer developers maybe cannot and perhaps should not try to solve these things and go at them alone. And so coming together to solve these things will sort of maybe not only save everyone's efforts, but also build better solutions. Also will spur innovation, which I think is a key right now, and also create sustainable libraries just in case, perhaps a developer leaves the IIIF community and that tooling needs to be updated and viewers are relying on those tools. Commons created tools and maintained tools can sort of ensure that those things have life beyond any one person or one organization. So Commons began as Viewder in 2016, and I'm not sure if the origins of this was before my time, but I assume it has something to do with viewing direction. And around 2020, when Mirador 3 adopted the Manifesto library, which is in Commons and also in use by Universal Viewer, I think this is when it was renamed to IIIF Commons. And again, I think that the aim there was to align common viewer fundamentals around various Commons, IIIF Commons libraries. So what is in the Commons? There's a variety of different packages. There's Manifesto I just mentioned, which is in use by both Mirador 3 and Universal Viewer. And this is sort of a parsing library that sort of really handles quite a bit as far as, and it is highly documented, but it handles quite a bit as far as parsing out various IIIF properties in the Presentation 3 API and 2 API. And then there's also newer packages that are being added pretty swiftly as we sort of come together to sort of try to figure out what IIIF Commons is. And so one of those is is Vault, which I think has been added in the past year. Stephen Frazier will talk about that in a bit. And then another new component that we're talking about building is the thumbnails component, which I think would aim to solve across different viewers how to build some sort of common front-end UI component for thumbnails. And Ed will discuss that. And that is it. And I'll pass it off to Stephen.
Thanks, Matt. That's great. And I've just, while Stephen's getting ready, I've put the link to IIIF Commons in the chat if you want to have a look. So IIIF Commons is both kind of a community, but also this kind of organization of different libraries, and Vault is a really good one. So pass over to Stephen.
Yeah, so this is a library that's part of IIIF Commons that's been in development for a long time, but it's finally part of the IIIF Commons, and it's essentially for loading, normalizing, and sort of tracking IIIF resources from the browser. So the way that this is sort of different from just fetching a manifest from a URL and using it in JSON is that this will the very first thing it will do is convert any IIIF into Presentation 3. So when you're coding, you're only coding against Presentation 3. And that all happens in the browser. The other thing it does is normalize the structure, but still keep it fairly IIIF-like. So that will ensure that everything that can be an array of values is an array. Any, obviously, labels are all language maps. So you can make a bit more assumptions when developing against IIIF, but you're still just assuming that this is good Presentation 3 IIIF. On top of that, it comes with TypeScript types for completion. So when you do fetch resources, manifest resources, or annotations, you get completion on those fields, which should hopefully catch issues, catch errors early in development. And the real goal of it is to make development easier without, imposing too many rules on or abstractions over IIIF. So, like I mentioned, it's a JavaScript package, so it can be installed from npm, or you can load it into a script tag, and you create a vault and you load IIIF content into the vault. And when you once you've loaded things into the vault, you can load a whole bunch of manifests in and then access them again in the vault. So there's quite a few different ways of accessing resources. So you can get it just by its ID or an ID and a type. But one important thing that we do when we load resources in is we keep the manifests or canvases or ranges, we unnest them from each other. So instead of working with a very nested data structure, you're working with a very flat data structure. So in this example, you can see we're getting a canvas by its ID and type. The manifest items would be just a list of IDs and types that you can then get the full resource for. And I'll come back to why that decision was made, but it does make editing and sort of listening to resources as they change easier. So because Vault isn't really about understanding IIIF, only the structure, it has a few sort of helpers for editing IIIF or changing IIIF resources. So in this example, you can see that we can modify a single field value or reorder entities. And these APIs are mainly intended to be abstracted. So it allows you to make very granular changes to the IIIF, and then you can listen to those changes in your front-end application. So similar to in like a library like React or Vue, you may want to sort of subscribe to changes so that you can re-render things. So there's a sort of an API for listening to anything in IIIF using subscribe and also get to sort of select and narrow down the slice of IIIF that you want to subscribe to, and then you can obviously render some UI in the browser. But most likely you're going to want to use a framework. So there's actually an embedded store. It's a Zustand store, and you can use any of the available libraries for React or Vue or Svelte to integrate into that ecosystem and use this just as any other reactive store. So you could, subscribe to a manifest for displaying them, and then you could, or a collection, for example, and then you could start incrementally loading manifests into the vault, and the sort of state would update as those manifests were loaded and more information was available for them. And you can also take data out of Vault, and you can do this at any level. So you can export, in this case, I'm just exporting canvases in the example here. So you can export as presentation 3 or 2. Of course, 2 has some limitations. It's sort of a downgrader, but it's mainly for sort of compatibility. If you did want to then pass it on to another tool that only supports presentation 2 at the moment, you could take presentation 3 resources and put them that way. So I sort of breezed through those quite quickly because these are really the minimum building blocks for IIIF. They're not abstractions that would make using IIIF easier, but those tools can be used to make different abstractions. And this is, I think, the focus for having this in IIIF Commons, is we can work together as a community to build new helpers and abstractions that their only dependency is the sort of short list of sort of the APIs of Vault, which really won't change all that often. But the helpers that I'm going to show will sort of change often. So just quickly, I wanted to go through some of the libraries that are using Vault or the presentation 2 to 3 upgrade. So Manifesto has recently had the 2 to 3, so presentation 2 to 3 upgrade, which will just make the code generally simpler, because this pattern of assuming that everything is presentation 3 will be sort of smooth things over and make development easier. And also another sort of list of the other projects that are using Vault or just the upgrader. So that brings on to Vault helpers, which is sort of using Vault to create IIIF abstractions. There are some that do require Vault and some that are just sort of standalone, but good to have them in one place for using. So in this example, there's a get value helper. It's really useful for distilling a language map down to a language, and it just figures out what the best language is based on your browser. So the two types of helpers, yeah, like I mentioned, they're helpers that require a Vault to exist and use Vault's APIs. So there's a thumbnail helper that's still in development, but for getting a best thumbnail at size for any given resource. So that could be a manifest, a collection, or a canvas, or canvas resource, and it just, you give it some parameters and it sort of goes through the Vault and checks a whole bunch of things and then brings back what it thinks would be the best thumbnail for that size. And then there's others where it would work with any IIIF presentation 3. And both types of helpers, I think, being in the same place and being documented in the same way is really valuable. So there's another helper here. So this is a bit more of a complex example. It's painting annotations. So if you're building a viewer and you want to know, okay, what should I be displaying in my viewer? You can use this helper to get a list of sort of the images. Now, what's useful here is it sort of abstracts away or helps with handling choices. So on this example on the right, this manifest has multiple choices that could be that are in the canvas, and you can pass in which choices have been applied, and you'll get back the things that you need to render. And you'll also get back the choices in a way that can be rendered. So this isn't really a model that exists in IIIF. It's a new model that has been created for this helper, and sort of aim to create more of these abstracted models and then use them in different viewers. Another standalone one is the content state helper. So you can parse content state or serialize content state, and it's, there's no dependency on Vault for this one, but having the code in the same place allows sort of reuse. If you did have a Vault, you could sort of integrate it in that way. So this has been quite a run through, quite a quick run through of sort of Vault and the helpers. But there is a documentation site that we've got which has the Vault and Vault helpers, and hopefully in the future some of the other IIIF Commons projects documentation in one place. And there's links to the GitHub, and I'll share a link to this presentation too. But yeah, we're really looking for just more participation in IIIF Commons in general, but also in the Vault helpers for creating sort of small slices of IIIF and really digging into the edge cases and sort of maximizing compatibility. And so I'll hand over to Ed, who's going to talk about another IIIF Commons project, which is the thumbnails panel.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great. Just again, while it's setting up, that's really, a great kind of summary of the type of libraries that we want to have in IIIF Commons, something that really kind of helps you with some of the difficult lifting, like working with different types of thumbnails. And I think particularly Vault's kind of design decision to kind of upgrade everything to 3 saves you so much development work and if statements on kind of different versions. And it's something I think we can also look at in the Python library as well with Prezi 2 to 3 generator. It's kind of a really interesting model. But looking at particularly one kind of use case with thumbnails, and there are so many options, pass over to Ed now to talk us through a new development we're looking at.
Hey, you hear me okay? So I'm Ed Silverton. I've worked on the Universal Viewer project for some time now. This is what it looks like. And yeah, I've participated in IIIF Commons really since the beginning. And so recently, we've been obviously running community sprints on the Universal Viewer that are funded by our steering group. And some issues on a recent community sprint involved thumbnails. So forces 2-page view, for example, and thumbnail layout on page manifest. So they're kind of paging related issues. And since version 4 of UV, we're able to kind of use React within the project. So we kind of took the opportunity to rewrite the thumbnail panel. So thumbnail panel is this. We also, the other React component we have at the moment is the download panel, but over time we want to kind of basically replace everything. So I implemented this kind of thumbnail panel as a standalone project. I find this kind of helps to kind of reason about it and test it independently, and it's a lot quicker kind of developer experience. So I created this separate project to kind of test it out, the ideas, and we have this thing. You'll notice that in IIIF Commons and increasingly in the community, you can see people using this thing called Code Sandbox. So there's a Code Sandbox for this repository here, and this is a kind of a live kind of editable version on the web, and you can see it's a pretty simple thing. You can kind of do all the things that the UV needs to do, where you can switch between paged and unpaged, set the viewing direction, change the canvas index, and there are a few manifests to test with. These are kind of focusing on non-paged content at the moment, but we'll add more to those. So when you change that, it updates. Been discussing on the IIIF Commons call, where there isn't a recipe available, maybe moving some of these test manifests to a kind of Commons library somewhere, repository somewhere, just so that they're stable. And because if you're using live data, they can often go down. So another use for the Commons potentially. Yeah, we've got this kind of simple control panel here. And after kind of doing this and kind of fixing the bugs and getting it back into the viewer, we discussed it on the IIIF Commons call and decided, maybe we should try and kind of write a spec for this thing and treat it as a first kind of Commons component written in React and TypeScript, and a lot of the technologies that we've kind of, I guess, sort of coalesced around. So there is a kind of here's the document we created, and I can put a link to this in the chat, or Glenn can, I'm sure. And yeah, we've kind of over the course of a few calls now, I think we've kind of broken this down into must-have list requirements. And this is, you know, I kind of got the ball rolling with my kind of minimum viable thumbnail panel for the UV. I won't go through all of these, but you know, one of the things where it differs to the UV is, you know, we can set the orientation of the thumbnail panel, so you know, we can make it horizontal instead of vertical, for example. And there's, you can see there's sort of some discussion going on, and we've been talking about, you know, how to style this thing. Actually, if you look at the IIIF Commons channel on the Slack, you can see the discussion happening there about good strategies to kind of style this thing, but in a generic way that allows people to style it, you know, themselves. So you can kind of think of it, I guess, as like a kind of a headless component, although that maybe not the best term, but you know, you're going to be able to kind of style it however you like. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the idea. This is obviously like great for the UV project. You know, the more we'd love to just be 100% kind of Commons components at some point in the distant future, maybe, because that's, you know, really helps with the maintenance of the project. And obviously there's just a kind of a effect kind of where, you know, more people thinking about it means the code's better and it's more generic, and you know, just, you know, an improvement over our current process. So yeah, it's really exciting. Yeah, and we're looking for volunteers as well, you know, to sort of help develop this thing. But right now we're kind of in the process of figuring out when we can do a kind of a sprint together to kind of sort of work on this. But if I think it's sort of, you know, next year, some point early next year. So if anyone would like to get involved in that, please let us know. I think that's it.
Thanks, Ed. Perfect timing. So yeah, just to reiterate what Ed said, that we are looking for volunteers to help with this development. So if you want to get involved, you can put your name and email address in the document. I think at the top we've got a volunteer section. There's also the IIIF Commons channel, which Ed mentioned, which you're welcome to join. And we're going to kind of do, I think, weekly meetings to kind of set up the infrastructure, make sure we've got the kind of design decisions right. And then we're going to have a look at a kind of a hackathon sprint type week. And we're looking at the end of January at the moment for that sort of thing. So if you are interested, please join the IIIF Commons channel. You can put your email addresses and I'll make sure you know about when the hackathon is. And the more that can join, the better. So thank you all. So there's two kind of really interesting projects there, IIIF Prezi looking at Python, and then IIIF Commons looking at kind of web components. But I think they're both kind of showing what kind of a rich community we have. And it's something that I hope we can do more of, kind of this shared development, to make it easier to develop these tools. And it's actually kind of one of the kind of key pillars that we're looking at in the strategy. So if I can do a shout out for the presentation tomorrow, one of the kind of key pillars we're looking at is this kind of helping this shared development. And we'll be doing a breakout session there. So if there's anything else that we could be doing, please do to contribute tomorrow. So we're going to have a 10-minute break now before the next session. Feel free to continue the discussion in Slack or on chat, and hopefully see you in the IIIF Prezi and IIIF Thumbnail communities. A big thank you to all the presenters, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you all.